All right. So you have caught me today. I am going through to review a taxonomy that I built, a very, very long time ago. And this is honestly not uncommon. A lot of taxonomists have, or ontologists for that matter, have a lot of projects that they've started or they just never got around to finishing. This one was a project that I did with the Smithsonian. And they had a collection of jewelry and beads that, because insurance is too high to put those out on display because they're so priceless and they're also gemstones and, very fine jewelry, stuff, they can't put it on display. And so they thought they would put it into a digital display. Great. Well, they didn't have taxonomy. They didn't have any way to describe these things so that they could be discovered easily on the open web. And so that's why they were thinking, okay, this taxonomy also has to think about linked data. And so this was back in the day. I feel so old saying that. This was back in the day when LinkedIn still had a lot of groups. I think they do still have groups, but this was when it was still popular and a lot of people were still using it. And it was kind of front and center on LinkedIn. And I was part of a group that the folks from the Smithsonian posted on, like they were just looking for volunteers to help. And I thought it was a great project. So even though I had a full-time job doing taxonomy and ontology, I decided to help out with it. So that's the background of what this is. And I'm going to leave down below the details of the project. And what we ended up doing was I did the project for them. And then I also asked, because at the time I was teaching at the University of Pittsburgh as well as a professor. And I thought, well, wouldn't this be cool as a project for students to learn how to do this? And so I was going to use it as a taxonomy and then had to convert that into an ontology. And so we created this in Web Protege and we started to use this in my classroom. But then I started doing workshops and I started doing even YouTube. I know one of my early YouTube videos, I had this as a project that volunteers could go in and help create. So it was crowdsourced and it was a great learning experience for all. However, I now have to clean it up and make it into a real taxonomy because of a different project I'm working on. And yes, it is a real taxonomy, but it's not a very good one right now because it was a learning exercise. And that's often what happens. Even if you're not doing a crowdsourced project, sometimes you get a lot of different departments or taxonomies have a lot of different owners and a lot of different inputs over the years. So this can happen. And so what I thought would be fun is we are going to make it a learning exercise again, except I'm going to show how to do the cleanup in this video. So we're going to go through the process of assessing the taxonomy, which is a big portion of the video. And then at the end, I'm going to show a cleaned up version, a very small cleaned up version of the taxonomy so that you can help clean it up if you would like. And also what I'm using this for now is a completely open source project. There's no money involved. So it's really just to help and embed those in the arts. So that's all it is. It's not going for any commercial things if you're worried about that. In fact, I will put it up on GitHub so that you all can use it after it's cleaned up. And if you want to be involved in this cleanup project, I created a Discord that I have details for down below as well if you want to participate and collaborate. Because I think that's what was missing the first time that we did this. While Web Protege has the ability to do collaboration, it's kind of passive. So you're in the tool and then you're out of the tool and there's no way for it to like send you stuff if you're not on there. And honestly, sometimes you just need to disconnect. So I'm not really complaining about that. But on Discord, it's more of a conversational area. I set up a whiteboard on there too, so we can start to do some of that. And I think I'm going to do some live events in the summer where we all get together if you're all available. And we do this together as an exercise. And I think it's going to be fun. At the very least, you can watch this video and see how I go through my assessment process when looking at a taxonomy for quality, what needs to be updated, and then what it looks like at the end, or at least a part of it at the end, once I go through and do some of the cleanup. All right, so if you are ready this early morning on the weekend, well, at least that's why I'm filming it in the weekend, let's get started. I got my coffee, I got you all, and we're gonna do this together. And don't worry, I'm gonna time lapse some things too, so you don't have to sit here for hours on end, which is what I'm going to be doing this morning. So if you wonder what goes into these videos, this is it. I got a whole day, a whole morning at least. I'm going to try to time box it for myself so I go and do something outside today, since I don't know if you can tell, the sun is coming out. All right, so with that, let's go get started. So the first thing we're going to look at is the metadata associated with the project. So that's actually up here. And so here you can see our display name, our description. If you're using desktop version, you're gonna have a whole lot more options to add metadata, but this is what we have right now. And so you wanna just get familiar with what was the main purpose of this taxonomy originally. What was its original intent? Who created it? Or which peoples created it, or which departments created it, whatever it is. If you are reusing data sets from the outside world, those should be listed. So you want to get familiar with the project before you start hacking and slashing. So the benefit here is I was the original creator, so I know the background of this project, which I already mentioned in the intro of the video. So hopefully you didn't skip that. But you can see that, you know, there are things that maybe could get updated. Like the prefix is just the generic prefix. We have our UIDs going normally as unique identifiers. We've got the annotation is going to be by label. It's going to be in English. And then you can see here that we have our display as label. Why it's in here twice, I don't know. So boop. Actually, it might have been that way because if you don't have English specified, the label might not display. So let's take that out for now. Okay, so right now I'm just going to leave this the way that it is, but this is, especially if you're doing updates and the ownership or the hosting or whatever it is, the people who have to pay for this taxonomy and its work and its maintenance, that should be somewhere in the IRI, so you get that namespace figured out, so you know where the body that is governing this thing is located, or at least who it is. So it doesn't have to be resolved on the open web, but that's what that would be. I'm going to leave it as is for now because it's not really that important to this project, because normally what I do is I use things like Web Protege and Desktop Protege to get a lot of clay on the table. I use Web Protege a lot to do collaboration with others. And then what I do is there are so many different taxonomy and ontology editing tools, and not to mention other tools like cataloging or linked data editors, or, you know, I could keep going. There's a lot of things out there that you can use where it can be exported from this tool, and then you can import it wherever you want to do the heavier lifting. So the next thing we're going to do is look at the composition. So the first thing I notice is there are some orphans, like this one. And I'm going to look at that one, and I can see what the label is. I can see who created it. And then, and anyone, by the way, that created this was they all knew this was an open project. So there is that. And then this is when it was created. Uh-oh. You can see the problem. So here's what we're dealing with. So first of all, the IRI, as I said, we're just going to keep it the way it was. So that's fine. This IRI is fine for this taxonomy. Now that we're updating this and cleaning this project up, I should go out and find out who the consumers of this are and how they are using these IRIs. Because this is a taxonomy, ideally the IRI is used, the ID is used, but it's not always the case. So some people might be using the label, which would be very unfortunate. But, you know, it happens a lot in the taxonomy space. So you want to make sure that you understand who's actually using this ID and how they're using it, because if you mess around with this ID or you delete this ID, you could be breaking systems down the line. So anytime you modify or delete something, you really need to understand if it's going to be a breaking change. I have a whole nother video on breaking changes, so I won't go over that here. Okay, so although I will link that down below. So the other problem here is, great, it's an exhibit. Defined by what? What is an exhibit? Like, we're talking about taxonomy of jewelry and beads. There is no jewelry or bead type called exhibit. Now, even if you're using machine learning or AI to assign your taxonomy, you still want to give direction as much as possible, because having a definition in here is going to help. Not only are the specific items being described, but it looks like a lot of the metadata associated with these are also being described, because this exhibit is probably which exhibit is connected to each individual piece of jewelry or beadwork. Or let's think about artists for a second. Yeah, that could be metadata, and we'll check it out here in a second to see if it's a mix, because that's the other thing you're going to see with taxonomy projects that have been around for a while that have had a lot of editors. You're going to get mixed context and mixed meaning in each of these branches, and we'll have to deal with that. So if we don't fix that, then we're going to have issues, because these will all display incorrectly. They will, if you're then loading this into a different system and you are doing your ETL, extract, transform, and load, where certain elements are going to be populating certain fields in a database or whatever it might be, these are going to be a mismatch. But as my friend Margaret Warren has said in the past, is this depicting an artist, or is it the artist who created it or inspired it? Those are three different things. So if you have a cameo or a caricature or something that has been inspired by, so a lot of Salvador Dali artwork has inspired other artwork. So what is this? All right, so let's go and look at artists and see what's going on in there. So you can see here, there's a problem. We have no provenance. We have no idea when this was created. We do have the creator, and it's listed as a relationship, which is also a mix. So let's go back to exhibit. So we can see here, there is metadata, and that is where it's using a known schema, Dublin Core, to describe the creator. But here, there is very little metadata other than the label. And then we have a relationship. Now, it depends on what you want to do with your taxonomy. Because this is not an ontology, adding a ton of different relationships isn't going to do you a lot of good unless you are doing an ontology, in which case, if you want to do a lot of relationships, then do an ontology. Normally, the relationships in a taxonomy that I would consider more ontological types of relationships are going to be the related, and you might be connecting to another entity in the taxonomy that way. So you can do it that way. So typically that kind of metadata is reserved for annotations. So as I'm going through and cleaning something up, I take note of issues as I find them, not specific issues like this exhibit needs to be updated with a definition. I'm going to say, there's definitions, a lot of definitions missing. And so I'm going to look for those big themes, because those are the things you want to clean up first, because it's going to get a lot of work done in a very short amount of time. And then you want to go through and fine tune it, not to overuse that word in the AI space, but you want to go in and then correct the individual elements that may have been missed with your first pass. Okay, so this is interesting. So we can see here that there are links. This is great. So let's go and open this up. What we have. Okay, so brooch. Oh, great. Okay, so this has information. This is obviously linked data because it's linking to this specific entity. There are pieces of information that we could reuse, right? So this is good. This is very, very good. We can first take inspiration from this, because the other thing that happens is when you're going from one old project and trying to renew it or give it a new life, things could have changed over the years. So you might see some other information that you didn't have available the first time you did the project. So now you need to understand if that's recent enough or if it's too outdated. And then you also need to find out how you can access this information. So it looks like you can download as a JSON file and there's a manifest, but it doesn't look like there's an API. There might be. So we would want to go and check that out just to understand, can we get all this data automatically, or do we have to do some kind of manual effort to get this information in? So we're not going to do that right now. This is for the long project that we have to do later, but that is what I would make a note of to see if this is a common theme. Okay, so we've got Degas. There is absolutely no information here. That's crappy. So I would make a note of that. And you can see here we're getting some more data sources. You would need to write out that data governance would need to be associated with this project because so far we haven't had any, and clearly it needs it. So going in here, we can also see like we've got some things that have just one name. We have double names. So these are like data governance elements that we're looking at. We have this one that is just an ID. So no, we're displaying on labels. So I'm going to go to label first and I can see. So first of all, this is not Inish caps like the other ones, but you also see there are 2 language tags here. Again, it's so tempting for me to delete this and just fix it right away. Avoid that inkling. If you want to fix a few things as examples, do it in your notes. Don't do it just in the data set, because then you're going to get mixed up on what you fixed and what you didn't. So just leave that for now. And you need to do this first pass so you can get a lot of work done in a short amount of time. So avoid making little tweaks as you go. Also with the date. Now let's go back. Yeah, the date. Oh, wait a minute. Is the date in a different form? Yep. Date format is wrong or inconsistent at least. Oh, okay. That's another thing that we're going to have to go and fix. Now, the one thing is I know the people who were volunteering on this project. So I know that the creator is the person who was putting things together. But what if this person, Josephine, is an artist? We have to do some disambiguation here. So that's another reason why it's incredibly important to note how artist should be defined, because creator can have a few different contexts. And if I didn't know that this was the individual creating this piece of information versus this person who is a creator called an artist, maybe that's how you model this. Instead of just artist, it would be creator, and you have artists, and then you have maybe metadata creator, if you need to track that in the taxonomy itself. You probably don't. It's probably going to be a system thing that tracks this, like a history of who's messing with what. Definition and scope note get mixed up a lot. Definition really should be how is artist in general defined at your organization versus scope note, how you should use this in data. Those are the ways that you define those two things. But, that's where having an example of it being used is also helpful for disambiguation, so that even if you're missing a definition and scope note, you have an example of how it's being used. Or you can, if you don't have this and you're going through and doing this project, you can go into the actual assets. So in this case, it was images that were digitized that are the images of the jewelry and beads. You would go in and look at the metadata assigned to each of those to kind of get a feel for how this taxonomy has been used in downstream applications or content sets. Okay, so the other thing I'm noticing is this is a very short list. So that tells me that, again, there is some data governance rule here somewhere that maybe when a new asset is added to the collection, the artist who created it is added here. It's not going to be a full list. And we did see, where was it? There was a Getty one in here. There we go. So the Getty has a full list of, most of the artists that are out there in the world or have been in the world. So do you really need a full list of all the artists, or do you want to just reuse things when you have that artist show up in your collection? It looks like that was the decision made here. So that's another data governance rule that you would want to note that you're picking up on as you go. So the next thing I do is I go in and start to open up some of the trees. Sometimes this is not going to be possible because the taxonomy is going to be too big. And you're going to want to see, is this actually a cohesive taxonomy, or are each of these branches basically like a mini taxonomy and they don't actually integrate with each other very much? Format, it looks like instead of being part of, so this could be, let's say, engine, and then you have a subcomponent of pistons, because that's a part of an engine. That would be a part of relationship. And this is something that, it's not always uniform in a taxonomy. Sometimes you'll have different parent-child relationships. And in this one, it looks like it's a type of, right? So amulet is a type of jewelry and bead format. So this is where it gets a little weird too, because like we're looking at format. Is jewelry box a format? That's weird, because like if we look at locket, that's like a type of jewelry. Hair ornament, is that a type of jewelry or is that a use? Okay, so hair ornament is not a function. It looks like, but wouldn't it be? So hair ornament could be a costume. So we can see here, these are kind of like, they're not necessarily function. They are scenarios almost, like it's for mourning. The function is not to mourn when you wear it or when you see it or when you encounter it. It's that it is used for when you are mourning versus it is being used as a hair ornament, because you could put a locket in your hair, right? And so these are questions you have to ask yourself when you're looking at these taxonomies is, what is the continuity? How would you clean these up? So not only do these not have definitions, but maybe these aren't the highest level terms or branches of your taxonomy. Maybe there's better ways to do it. Like even like this one. Well, I mean, wouldn't that be a function? Right? So, and there's nothing wrong with this. Like this was a pure crowdsourced project. Are we surprised these things are inconsistent? Absolutely not. This is what happened. Oh, this isn't even an ID. Okay, well, that's another thing that we need to address. We saw that IDs were unique IDs, and now we have the label as the ID. If you do use the linked data, it wouldn't really matter if you move it around, because again, as long as you know there are no other downstream applications that are using the hierarchy or the path, then you can move it around. If you do have things that are depending on that, you have to decide if you're willing to chance that breaking change, or if you can mitigate it. Looking down into, so location, held museums. So now we're seeing some like head words, location, and then held museums. What was the purpose of having both? Do you just need held museums? And would these be collections, right? So each of these museums have a collection, but I thought we saw collection. Yeah, okay, so there's 3 different types of collections. So maybe the others are not part of a collection. So if we look at some of these, let's say granite. Granite is a stone. And if you look at granite, it has some scientific properties. Like it could have, if it's a chemical, it could have a chemical compound. If it is something on the periodic table, it would have that. Granite, there are different types of granite. There are different elements even associated with types of granite. Like some granite has uranium in it, and then what do you do if other things that your jewelry is made of also have uranium in it? Like, I don't know, uranium glass pendant. Okay, well now you have 2 things that are using uranium. Where does that go? Is that still a material? Right? So you really need to think through, like, what level of granularity do you need? And going to the assets that are already using this is a good first step. If you can see that that is not something that is needed in the taxonomy, then don't add it. It doesn't need to be, you're not striving for completeness here. You're striving for correctness and coverage. Coverage and completeness are not the same thing. You need to be able to cover the assets that you have so you can find them, not to have the most complete list of all stones known to man. So having identification here is problematic because like there's so much in a taxonomy or an ontology for that matter that depends on identification. So so that's the other thing, like when you're going through this, it's also looking at things that could be detrimental to describing things, or that could be easily confused in the rest of the taxonomy or the use of the taxonomy. And again, because we have no metadata, we need to fix that because that's the number one issue. Like I will consider this a huge success if we can just add in definitions. And, you just saw me kind of popping around and it gets confusing when you have too many things open. I'm doing this by hand. You do not need to do this by hand. You can do some pattern recognition. Let's see, was it this one? Yeah. So the date range was different between, where's that one that I was looking at from before? Oh boy, there's another date, another type of date formatting. So that's a pattern recognition. You can go in and you can see if there's actually libraries out there on the different formats of date, the most common ones, and you can see like how many of those show up in your data. There you go. You know for sure you need to go and do some cleanup with that. Go through and look at the source and you can do some pattern recognition. How much of that has HTTP in front of it versus something that looks more like a citation? The format, not just date, but let's see, which is this one? No. Oh, yeah, this one is another different format. So you can see some discrepancies with that, and you can just get a representative sample of how many things are done in this format for the creator field versus some of the other things that you've seen. So those are some of the areas that you just want to go in and try to find automated ways of discovering, but you kind of have to get in. You have to figure out the feel of some of these things. And the only way to do that is to kind of poke around at it. So this is something else you want to go through and see if there's any comments or commits or potential suggestions that were not committed, and make sure that you go through and address those. And then any service issues, meaning there's requests for things to be added to the taxonomy, needs that the taxonomy is not meeting. You want to go through and review all of that too as you go through and try to clean up your taxonomy. And at the end of the day, you always want to double check the way you're designing the taxonomy is meeting the needs of the systems, the users, the processes, the content that it's going to be used with. All right, so that is what a sample of the finished product should look like. And like I said in the beginning of the video, if you are interested in collaborating on this, make sure you check all the information down below if you want to get started with me. All right, so with that, I want to thank you very much, and I'll catch you next time.